morning, everyone. Oh, you're all asleep. I know, it's early Saturday morning. Morning, everyone.
Morning.
There you go. We are awake. Welcome to Sun Valley. Great to have you here this morning. It's kind of exciting times in our house because tomorrow, if you don't know, Sherry and I are going to become great-grandparents in October from Sabrina back then. Yes. But tomorrow we get to find out. It's the big reveal day apparently in our house. So we've been taking bets on boy or girl. So I'll be at the back. So if you'd like to play, no, just kidding. Yes. Anyway, so we're excited and looking forward to that. So anyway, it's exciting times. But again, just welcome. Let's just take a moment and pray before we start. Father, we just thank you for, again, the Sabbath and the chance to kind of step out of our busy daily lives and take some time to worship together, to visit together, and to rest. So we just ask that you will be here with us as we worship in music and in teaching and in giving. We just ask for your blessing. Amen.
Morning, Sun Valley. I just want to invite everyone into worship today and just to be able to let go of everything that happened maybe to you this weekend, or my work week was stressful, and so I'm glad to be able to be here today to just give it all to God and start fresh and be able to just have a day where we can rest and become closer to God.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing. Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up. It
take a minute to pause for a second and close your eyes. Think about all the things that have happened to you this week, leading up to this moment. And maybe you've had a rough week. Maybe you've had some difficulties. Maybe you've had some struggles. Maybe you've had some problems that you feel are just too big for you to handle. But put that all aside for just a second and think about how God has been good to you this week. That in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the struggle, in the midst of the difficulties, in the midst of your problems, think about what God has done for you this week. There was a song that lifted your heart, or a friend that said something meaningful to you, or whether it's just the fact that you had the strength to keep going even when you felt like you couldn't. Think about how good God has been to you this week. Just meditate on that for a second. God has been just so tremendously good. I know in my life personally. And one of the ways that we love to worship here at Sun Valley is by being able to give back through our tithes and through our offerings. You know, we believe that no matter what is going on in our lives, we believe that God has been good. And we believe that it is our blessing and our opportunity to be able to worship by giving back through those tithes and through those offerings. And so today we want to invite you to be able to worship through giving. And there are a couple of ways that you can give today if you would like to worship through giving. You can give online through AdventistGiving.ca. They also have an app available now for both Android and for Apple devices. And so if you'd like to give through the app, you can give through the app at AdventistGiving.ca. You can also give through our tithe envelopes, which are available just outside these doors to the left. And you can give through our Square app, which will be available at the very end of our service with myself here up at the front. If you don't have any cash, or if you don't have any checks that you'd like to give through debit or through credit card means, we do have those options available for you today to be able to give through those means. And as we invite the ushers on forward, we just want to invite you to bow your heads and pray with me for a second. We ask God to bless these offerings, and as we also thank God for the means to be able to give back to Him today. God, you have been so generous, so tremendously good. Even if we haven't really experienced any extra blessings today, the very fact that we're alive, the very fact that we have a hope and a promise of salvation through your Son is good. And so God, we honor you today and we praise you today by giving back through our tithes and through our offerings, by giving back what you have given us the strength to provide for ourselves. And so God, as we give back, whatever it is, be it great or small, I just pray that you would multiply it. And that you would make it go a long way to supporting the ministries that we have here in this church, and in this community, and in your kingdom. Thank you so much for the blessings you have provided, and for the blessings that we know in faith you will continue to provide. In your holy and precious name we pray.
times I fail, still your mercy remains. And should I stumble again, still I'm caught in your grace everlasting. Your light will shine when all else fades, never ending. Your glory goes beyond all fame. Sounds so beautiful. You will above all else. You will above all else. My purpose remains. The art of losing myself in bringing you praise everlasting. Your light will shine when all else fades, never ending. Your glory goes beyond all fame. And my heart and my soul, Lord, I give you control. Consume me from the inside out, Lord. Let justice and praise become my embrace, to love you from the inside out. Everlasting, your light will shine when all else fades, never ending. Your glory goes beyond all fame, and the cry of my heart is to bring you praise from the inside out. Lord, my soul cries out. You will above all else. My purpose remains. The art of losing myself in bringing you praise everlasting. Your light will shine when all else fades, never ending. Your glory goes beyond all fame. My heart and my soul, I give you control. Consume me from the inside out, Lord. Let justice and praise become my embrace, to love you from the inside out. And everlasting, your light will shine when all else fades, never ending. Your glory goes beyond all fame,
much pain and suffering here on earth that we know that Jesus came down to die on the cross and to give his life to allow us the chance at a happy life with you. And, thank you for what you gave us and what we have to look forward to. Amen.
Thank you, worship team. Welcome again to Sun Valley. This is a place where we believe in growing faith, building community in the hope of Jesus. And we want you to know that we do have our kids' classes today. So if you're 12 and under, your classes will be on the other side of that wall there. And if you're 12 and over, youth will be on the right side over here. Pastor Abraham, it's all yours.
Good morning again. I just want to welcome you again. We believe in, it's like quiz, what we do now every single week. We believe in growing what?
Faith,
Building
community,
and the hope of
Jesus.
The last one should be I say this every time, the last one should be the most obvious. If you guys get that wrong, I mean.
You're failing, man.
Yeah. If you get it wrong, then I'm failing too. I'm doing something wrong if we're not preaching the hope of Jesus. But today we're going to be continuing on in our series we're calling The Greatest Story, the Unexpected Narrative of Jesus. And through this series that we started back in September, we are exploring some of the major stories and themes of the Bible, and we're discovering some of the ways that God is communicating with us and revealing his character through the often countercultural and counter-social ways that he demonstrates it in. And as we read through these stories, as we discover these stories from Genesis all the way to Revelation, we are finding that some of the ways in which God works through his people and for his people is pretty surprising. It's often not the way that we expect God to work. And all the while, this surprising way, this counterintuitive way that God is working is pointing us to the counterintuitive redemption and redemptive work that Jesus would do on the cross. And so we're in the beginnings of our book of 1 Samuel, so we're going to continue on with our story today in 1 Samuel chapter 8. 1 Samuel chapter 8. If you have your Bibles, you can read along with us, and if not, it'll be available on the screen for you. But before we begin, and as I give you time to get to 1 Samuel chapter 8, we need to understand a few notes and a few things before we go on with this story today. Because the coronation of Saul, and that's kind of what we're going to be starting to deal with today, the crowning of Saul is not this standalone story. It's not this story that we just take apart and we pull out of the Bible, because we often do this sometimes with the Bible, and I'm guilty of doing this myself, is that we read stories that maybe we're familiar with or new stories, and we tend to pluck them out of the Bible. You guys ever do that? Like, you guys read the story of Noah, and you understand the story of Noah, or the story of Jonah, or the story of Adam and Eve, and we take them out of the Bible and we read them as these standalone stories. We just take them as a story in itself. But that's not really how the Bible functions. The Bible is not full of epics or tales. It's full of stories that are deeply connected and rooted in the social, political, and cultural backdrops of the world around them. And so the author of the Bible and the authors of the Bible often write in ways that assume that you, as the reader, understand all of the political, historical, and cultural nuances of the stories that they are writing about. And sometimes it's not as evident to us as the reader. The Bible is not meant to be understood as a collection of individual stories, but rather the Bible is meant to be understood as a continually developing work from Genesis to Revelation that spans centuries and millennia. And while our Bibles end after 66 books, while the Bible ends after the book of Revelation, the stories and our stories are meant to be an extension of the Bible. They're meant to be an extension of the Bible in which God is also revealing his will to us and working through continually broken people like myself to bring about the restoration of God's creation through the ministry, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's the gospel. And so this particular story here in 1 Samuel chapter 8 is supposed to be, and is supposed to be read as an extension of the patterns and history that we find recorded in the book of Judges. And the book of Judges, if you're not familiar with the Bible or the story of the Judges, the book of Judges records the rise of different tribal leaders that come up, that God raises up, and that rally the nations together, to the nations of Israel, to be able to defeat and provide victory against some of the surrounding enemies that they face, whether it's the Amalekites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Philistines, whoever it is. And so throughout the book of Judges, there's this few prevailing patterns that occur. And one of the patterns that we find in the book of Judges is that no matter how godly a judge was, no matter how close he stuck to God, or no matter how chosen he was by God, the people would still always turn back to idol worship. It's a pattern we see with the Israelites all the time. But no matter how godly a leader is, they would still turn back to idol worship. And that resulted in the subjugation and the oppression of their people by hostile enemies that surrounded them. Right? When they abandoned God, they abandoned his protection, and now they were subject to the oppression of the people around them. And the second thing that we read in the book of Judges, is this pattern that occurs as the author writes this, is that all of these things, at least the author reasons this out to be, all of these things happen because there is no king. And you read it a couple times in the book of Judges where it says, and these things happened because there was no king in Israel. And you read it like 5 or 6 times in the book of Judges, where the author is trying to really point you to the idea that part of the reason people are rebelling, part of the reason people are kind of abandoning this worship of Yahweh is because there is no centralized government. Because there is no king to rule over the people and to keep them in line. There is no centralized national authority. So the story that we find here in 1 Samuel chapter 8 comes right on the heel of these repetitive patterns of idol worship and oppression, of nationalistic ambitions by the people, and their desire to have a kingly centralized leadership in the form of this monarchy that they wanted. And so that's why, we're not reading 1 Samuel chapter 7, but that's why, if you read 1 Samuel chapter 7, it is very reminiscent of the stories in the book of Judges. Right? If you've ever read the stories of the book of Judges, they follow that same pattern. The people are rebelling, they realize they've done something wrong, they repent, God delivers them, and then repeat that. Right? And then 1 Samuel chapter 7 actually has the same predictable formula. The people are oppressed. They cry out to God. Samuel gathers them together, who happens to be the judge at the time, and he leads them into repentance, and then God defeats the Philistines and they're delivered from their enemies. But the pattern again continues, and the people, instead of accepting this judgment, instead of accepting God's deliverance, they request a king. And the only difference this time from the book of Judges and the story in 1 Samuel is that God actually relents, and God gives them what they ask for. And so this is what we're reading in 1 Samuel chapter 8, starting from verse 1. We'll read the whole chapter here together. It says this: When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not follow in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So all the elders of Israel gathered together, and they came to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, "You are old." He said, "You're old. You're decrepit. You can't walk. You can't judge. You can't even see." He said, "You are old, and your sons do not follow in your ways. So now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." Important, such as all the other nations have. But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel. And so he prayed to the Lord. Samuel was offended because he's the judge, he's the leader. And so he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, "Listen to all the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day that I brought them out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights." Verse 10 says, Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. And he said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons, and he will make them serve with his chariots and his horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters. He will take them to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and his attendants. And pause here for a second in verse 15, because a tenth is what was reserved to God. And so now Samuel is painting this idea that the king that they're wanting is not just this simple idea. It is in direct opposition and contrast to God. So that's kind of what he says in verse 15. Verse 16, your male and female servants and the best of your flocks, and you yourselves, not just your sons, not just your daughters, not just your servants, not just your flocks, but you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that. Verse 19, but the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations with a king to lead us and to go out before us and to fight our battles. And when Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord, and the Lord answered, listen to them and give them a king. Then Samuel said to the Israelites, everyone go back to your town. So at the end of chapter 7, we read that Samuel judged over Israel. And he judged for a number of years, just like all the judges in the book of Judges. In the beginning of chapter 8, we then read that Samuel tried to establish his sons as judges over Israel. But the problem is that his sons did not follow in his ways. They didn't love the Lord like Samuel did. It says they perverted justice and they chased after dishonest gain. Samuel's sons don't just follow in his footsteps, but they use their offices of power for evil and for personal gain. They use it to make themselves rich. And there's this pattern that happens when it comes to Israelite leadership. It's this idea in the Bible that leadership and power, listen to this, is not just passed down through family lineage, but rather leadership and power is given, granted, and chosen by God. Because power was never meant to be guaranteed and passed down through traditional succession. Instead, it was to be carefully selected by the only one who could truly know someone's heart. God. And so we see this in the succession of Moses. You might not have noticed this, but you see this, that Moses' sons don't just automatically become the leaders of Israel. Who becomes the leader of Israel after Moses dies? Joshua. Because God had chosen him because he was a godly man. And then you see it in the book of Judges in the story of Gideon. Gideon becomes a judge, and the people gather around him, and they say, Gideon, we want you to be our king, and we want your sons and your sons' sons and your sons' sons' sons to be our kings. And Gideon says, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. My sons will not rule over you. I will not rule over you. Instead, it will be God who rules over you. And we see in the story of Eli, back in Samuel chapter 3 and Samuel chapter 2, where Eli's sons, Phinehas and Hophni, they did wicked things, and they weren't worthy of leading Israel because they also perverted justice and stole from the people. And so we see it again with Samuel's sons. His sons also pervert justice, and they choose the path of evil instead of good. And we'll see it with Saul later as we continue on through our story, through our series. We'll see it with Saul, that God rejects Saul as the king, and Jonathan, his next in line, doesn't become the king, but rather God chooses David. And the only reason, because you'll find that David does have his sons rule over Israel, but the only reason that ever happens is because God promised David and said, I will always have a descendant of yours on the throne. But even then, the succession didn't happen as traditionally would have happened. It wasn't the eldest son that was chosen. It wasn't Absalom or Adonijah, because there's this whole controversy that happens with them. Instead, the next in line of David's sons is Solomon, the son of a man that David committed adultery with and murdered over. God chose that guy because he was a godly man. And so this is what we find through the story of Judges, the story of Samuel, is that this power isn't just inherited, it isn't passed on, it isn't guaranteed. Listen, that power isn't guaranteed. It is granted by God. Only God grants it. And so Samuel then is frustrated with the decision these people are making because he takes it as this personal rejection of his own leadership. But God speaks to Samuel and assures him, listen, Samuel, it's not you. It's not you. It's me. That's what he says, it's not you, it's me. He says, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. They're rejecting me as a king. And so under God's instruction, Samuel grants them their request. But before he does that, he lists to them all these negative side effects and negative consequences of the choices, or of the choice that the people are asking for. And this is our very first lesson for today. Our first lesson is this: choice carries consequences. Okay? Choice carries consequences. The choice to no longer accept God's direction, the choice to go our own path, carries with it severe consequences. You see, Samuel informs them, and he tells them, you are going to be slaves again. This is a big issue for the Israelites, because they spent 400 years in slavery previously. They were under Egyptian rule. They just escaped that. Like literally less than 100 years ago, a couple of generations ago, they've escaped slavery from the Egyptians, and they're thinking for themselves, and they're saying, man, like, we don't care. We want our king, even if it means going back into slavery. And Samuel tells them, listen, the king's going to take your sons and your children and your livestock and your land, and he's going to challenge God by demanding just as much as God asks from you. But the people don't even listen. The story says that. They don't even care to listen. It's not like they sat down and then had a pros and cons list and then listened like, okay, Samuel, these are all the things that are wrong, these are all the things that are good. They didn't even care. It says they didn't even listen. They said no. They plugged their ears and they're like, no. No, we don't want to listen to you. We just want a king. And so Samuel tells them, these are the consequences that your choices will bring, but the people don't even care to listen. They ignore God's counsel. They ignore his advice in the matter, and they continued on in their choice, demanding their choice. But when we reject God's direction and decide on our own path, we have to accept that there will be side effects and consequences to those choices. We have to take the consequences with the perceived benefits. Because they request a king to be like all the other nations. And let me make it clear that the request for a king was not bad in and of itself. It wasn't bad that they had requested a king. In fact, God had planned to give Israel a king. That's why he wrote regulations and stipulations in Deuteronomy chapter 14. He says, when you get to the land that you're going to, and the people ask for a king, this is the kind of king that I will give you. God had already planned to give them a king. But the reason it was a bad request was not because they requested it, but for the reason that they requested it. They didn't want it to keep in line. They didn't want it so that they could have this godly person to rule and judge over them and make sure they were following God's decrees. They wanted a king so they could be like everybody else. They wanted a king so they could be like the nations around them. And that's the model of kingship that they wanted to pattern their king after. They wanted a warrior king. But God wanted a spiritual leader. They wanted a human ruler, while God wanted divine relationship. They weren't rejecting Samuel's leadership. They were rejecting God's plan for Israel. And we'll find this out as we continue our series, that even though Saul is chosen by God, because Saul is chosen, God chooses him, God blesses him, God rests his spirit on him. Even though Saul is chosen by God, the very first king, especially under the model of kingship that the people wanted, ended up being a terrible thing for Israel. It didn't go the way they wanted it to, because choice carries consequences. Choice carries consequences. We often make the mistake of believing that we know what's best for us. God has given us counsel and direction on how to live our lives, on how best to live our lives, and what paths to follow and what directions to head in. And not only that, but he's also shown us what it means to live. And he also gives us warning what it means to choose anything but him. He tells us this is the path that you're going to walk down if you choose to walk down a different path. This is the warnings, these are the side effects, these are the consequences that will happen if you choose to reject my leadership and my direction in your life. And I want to clarify something with you here, because it's a common misconception, I think, that sometimes we think God only has one plan for our life. Right? Sometimes we think that God only has one path. And then we reject the idea of following God, because it's like, oh man, if God has this path and I kind of want this, I don't want to go down a path that I don't want to go down. I don't want to go down a path where everything is decided for me, where I have no other option, where to choose anything but this one option leads me to failure. That's not how God is. God doesn't choose just one path for you. God doesn't choose just one direction for you. God has an infinite number of possibilities and paths and options for you. There are an infinite amount of ways that we can fulfill God's calling for our lives. Because this is simple. This is God's calling. God's calling is to love mercy, act justly, and walk humbly with Him. If it fits in those parameters, you're within God's path. If it fits in those parameters, you are following in God's direction. Any path or choice that keeps God at the center of our lives, that works for good in the world around us, that is working towards God's kingdom, is a good path that God has for you. Don't make the mistake of thinking that God has only one plan for your life and choose anything else is failure. There are options. And the options change as we change. God is constantly evolving and changing the path ahead of us. But as much as we have the choice to choose God, we also have the choice to reject God. And that choice carries its consequences. Don't make the mistake that the Israelites made. They refuse to listen to counsel. They don't even read it. They don't even listen. They say, no, we just want to go through our own path. We want to make our own choices. But choice carries consequences. And so we'll find, and you'll find this throughout your life, that as you choose God, you don't have to worry about any consequences. Because God takes care of it for you. And the people ignore God's warning here, and they demand their own king. And this is interesting. God doesn't punish them. God honors their request. God changes His own plans for Israel. Because God had plans for Israel. But they wanted their own thing. And instead of forcing them down one path, God says, okay, we'll go your way. But let me tweak that a little bit. This is the amazing things that God relents. God changes His plans to deal with us. God's primary focus is not following through what He has to do, but His primary focus is His relationship with us, His walk with us. He loves us so much that He's willing to change His plans just to accommodate us. We're going to learn our second lesson in just a bit, but let's skip a couple chapters. 1 Samuel chapter 10. 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 20. It says this, and it'll be on the screen for you. When Samuel had all Israel come forward by tribes, the tribe of Benjamin was taken by lot. Then he brought forward the tribe of Benjamin clan by clan, and Mattri's clan was taken. Finally, Saul, son of Kish, was taken. But when they looked for him, he was not to be found. And so they inquired further of the Lord, has the man come here yet? And the Lord said, yes. He has hidden himself among the supplies. And they ran and they brought him out. And as he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. And Samuel said to all the people, do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There was no one like him among all the people. And the people shouted, long live the king. And Samuel explained to the people the rights and the duties of kingship. And he wrote them down on a scroll and deposited it before the Lord. Then Samuel dismissed the people to go to their own homes. And Saul also went to his own home in Gibeah, accompanied by valiant men whose hearts God had touched. 27. But some scoundrels said, how can this fellow save us? They despised him, and they brought him no gifts. But Saul kept silent. So God is choosing then their king through lots. And Samuel, or Saul's name, is pulled out. And they find him hiding among the supplies. And they say, is this the guy? And God's like, yeah, this is the guy. You know, Saul was chosen to be king, and Saul was fit to be king, not because he was tall, or handsome, or rich, or brave. Saul was taller than any of the other Israelites. Saul was a handsome man. Saul came from a very rich family in the tribe of Benjamin. Saul was a warrior king, but he wasn't fit to be king for any of those reasons. Saul was fit to be king for this sole reason, because God had chosen him at that time. It wasn't his qualifications. It wasn't his background. It wasn't his looks, his height, his riches. It wasn't his qualities. It was the fact that God had chosen him to be king and set His Spirit upon him. You see, Saul was not inherently kingly, but God chose him to be king. And even though, by all exterior appearances, Saul seemed like the right kind of person, Because that's the kind of king they wanted. They wanted a rich king, a tall king, a handsome king, a brave king, a warrior king, and Saul fit that description for them. And as the people begged for a king, they got what they asked for. They got exactly what they wanted. But it says in verse 27 that some scoundrels were still unhappy with the decision and said, how can this fellow save us? This is our second lesson today. Our second lesson is this. Listen, this one's important. Shortcuts lead to shortcomings. Listen to that. Shortcuts lead to shortcomings. Because God will change his plans to accommodate us. God will give us the shortcut that we're asking for. But shortcuts lead to shortcomings. What you get isn't always what you ask for. What we want and what we ask for and what we get don't always line up. For one thing, they wanted a king to solve all of their problems and concerns they had. But having a king in the way they wanted the king brought its own set of new problems. And secondly, even though they got what they asked for, there were still people who were dissatisfied with the decision. Everybody got what they asked for. They got their king. But not everybody got what they wanted. And no matter who was selected, whether it was Saul or someone else, there still would have been groups of people dissatisfied with the decision. There will always be people dissatisfied with the decisions, especially once they get Once you get what you want, there are always going to be a moment of dissatisfaction. You're always going to be dissatisfied when you go your own way and take your own shortcuts. And we make the mistake of thinking that we know what's best for ourselves. We're short-sighted in this regard. We focus on the problem in front of us and try to find short-term solutions and shortcuts, but those bring just as many new problems as the problems we had to begin with. Guess follow so far? When we take our shortcuts, they lead to shortcomings. We often trade one set of issues for another. And this happens the most when we diverge from God's direction in our lives and demand our own path. When we ignore the warning that God has for us, we bring on a new set of problems and are bound to be dissatisfied. When we demand our own way, we might get what we ask for, but it often turns out not to be like anything that we had in mind. Because shortcuts lead to shortcuts. And you see, God knows not just our wants, but God knows the needs behind our wants. We talked about 2 weeks ago on this. God's answer might not always satisfy us right away. But that's because God is addressing the needs that we might have not yet recognized. You see, God addresses the root of our issues, while His solutions for our lives aren't always instantaneous, they bring long-term satisfaction. When we demand our own way, when we separate from God's direction, we might get what we ask for, but it might not be what we want or need. The only way to have our needs fully met is to trust that God will take care of them in His time and in His way. And the people of Israel, however, they're tired of waiting on God's way. God had already promised them to give them a king, but they were tired of waiting on God's way, and they demanded God to operate on their terms instead. They wanted an earthly ruler instead of the heavenly ruler that they had. And while, yes, Samuel's sons were terrible rulers, while they perverted justice and chased their own ways, what the people really wanted wasn't good leadership. What the people really wanted was a king. And the king they wanted was also a rejection of God's leadership. This is our final lesson for today. Our final lesson is this: you can't have two kings. You can't have two kings. You see, the people were asking for a monarchy on their terms. Okay? They were rejecting the established theocracy. A theocracy is a system of government or governance where God is the ruler of the nation. You see, God ruled Israel, and He appointed leaders to carry out His instructions and His will. But the people wanted an independent ruler to govern them. And they rejected God's rulership over their lives. And God gave them their king, under the condition that the king would still be under God. But the way they demanded and crowned the king was nothing short of a rejection of the true king of Israel. The kind of king they wanted rejected God as their king. You can't have two kings. I invite the band to come on up as we close. Whatever we give all of our focus, our attention, our time, our talents, our finances, whatever we give that to, that's what eventually becomes ruler over our lives. Whatever we give the power to influence and govern our lives is what becomes ruler over us. And we get to choose what rules us. We get to choose who rules our lives. We can choose work. We can choose relationships. We can choose our personal goals. We can choose the pursuit of money. We can choose entertainment. We can really choose anything to rule over us. But as long as we give those things power to rule over us, we are removing power from God to rule over us. As long as we crown those things king, we are rejecting God as the king of our hearts. And we can't have two masters. We can't have two rulers. We can't be split in opposite directions. We can't have two kings. It doesn't work. There's only one throne. You can't have two kings, but we do get to choose what we give priority to. We do get to choose what we give power to in our lives. We can choose negativity. We can choose the things of this world, or we can choose to give power to God in our lives. We do get to choose who or what we crown as ruler over us. And we have to remember that the coronation of one king, listen to this, the coronation of one king is the dethroning of another. Let's follow. The coronation of one king is the dethroning of another. To choose anything else as king in our lives is to reject God as king in our lives. There is only one throne. There's only room for one ruler in our lives, and we get to decide whether we let God rule or we let anything and everything else rule. What we choose has consequences because choice carries consequences. If we demand to go our own way, we'll be forced to face the consequences of those choices. To choose anything except God is to choose everything that isn't of God. If we reject the path of life and light and goodness, we inevitably follow the path of death, darkness, and evil. And God has an infinite amount of good things planned for your life. He has an endless amount of paths and directions and options that you could choose to let Him lead you on. But when we demand our own path, we have to be willing to accept the consequences. And shortcuts lead to shortcomings. When we demand our own path, don't be surprised if it's not all you thought it would be. Don't be surprised if you're dissatisfied with the results. God knows our needs better than we ever could. And no matter how long we have to wait or how difficult the path ahead may seem, we can know with full confidence that whatever God has in store for us will be perfectly good. The problems come when we try to find our own shortcuts and our own paths, because shortcuts lead to shortcomings. But if we are patient to wait on the Lord, we can know that whatever God has for us will be good because He is good. And remember that you can't have two kings. The coronation of one king is the dethroning and rejection of another. To crown anything else as ruler over our lives is to reject God as ruler over our lives. We crown kings by giving people or things power in our lives. Whatever we give power to rules our lives. Whatever we give our heart to becomes the king of our hearts. But there's only one person that is worthy of being ruler of our lives. There's only one God who is perfectly good. There's only one God who gave up His life so that you could find yours. There's only one God who conquered death so you could find victory over the powers of this world. There's only one who deserves to be king of our hearts, and His name is Jesus. To Jesus we give all the honor and all the glory and all the power. To Him we give all of our strength and all of our mind and all of our hearts. To the one and only God we give the authority to be king. And this king is is good. Because for far too long we've been ruled by other things. For far too long we've been giving our hearts to negativity and to evil and to sin and to the darkness of this world. For far too long we have crowned another king. But today we get to choose who rules our hearts. Today we get to choose who is master of our souls. And so if it's your desire today to put an end to the evil rule in your heart, if it's your desire today to stop crowning other things kings, if it's your desire to stop letting sin and death have power over your lives, if it's your desire to let Jesus be the king of your hearts, I would ask that you would stand with us today as we sing our closing song.
You're never gonna let me down.
Stay standing and bow your heads with me. God, you are a good God. God, you never will and never have let us down. Our failures come not when we choose to follow you, but when we choose to go our own way. God, I pray that we would not choose and demand our own paths, and would not take the shortcuts that lead to shortcomings, and would not ignore your counsel and your warnings for our lives, but that instead we would choose to wait patiently on the Lord and trust that all the good things you have planned for us will come to fruition in our lives in your time and in your way. God, I pray that we would remove the idols from our hearts. They would stop giving power to everything else around us, but instead give power to you. I pray that we would stop rejecting you as King of our hearts, but that instead we would crown you and give you the honor and the glory that you are due. God, I pray that every person here would accept you into their hearts, and that you would be sole ruler and sole King. God, we praise you because you are a good King that rules in justice, mercy, grace, and forgiveness. So, God, we come to your throne, accepting you as King, and receiving the salvation that comes through your Son, Jesus Christ. In the precious name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
We just want to take a couple of minutes and remind you of some of the ways that you can connect here with our community. Just want to remind you that every Saturday morning at 10 a.m., the young adults have a class where they meet over in the fellowship room, 18 to ages 35, and on the first of every month, they have a special breakfast as well. So if you're in that age group, you're welcome to join. Also, this next weekend on Father's Day, June the 16th, we are going to have our annual baseball game. I noticed that, I just wanted to see, Abraham wrote this and he says, geriatrics versus pediatrics. So we've moved to the geriatric side, it was. But I will remind everybody that about over the last 15 years, I think the so-called pediatrics have won once. So the oldsters use, wisdom to beat the youngsters. So it'll be competitive. We invite you to come out. It's going to be at 10 a.m. At the Okanagan Christian School ball field. Come out at 10 a.m. and basically bring a side salad, hot dogs, and whatnot will be provided. So we're going to have a barbecue lunch after that before we all head off on our Father's Day activities. So come out and enjoy the competition. Lastly, on July the 6th, we're going to have kind of a summer mix and mingle. The youth here are going to basically, after church, provide us with watermelon, ice cream sandwiches, and lemonade. So just a chance to eat some healthy food and meet some of your community. Sometimes we come to church and we all leave in a rush and we don't really get a chance to meet each other. So even if you don't like anybody, stay for the ice cream sandwiches. We invite you to come and join us.
Our geriatric versus pediatrics, our old versus young baseball game is always a blast. So if you're a young person, bring your A game. If you are an old person, bring your Rub 535. I'm just kidding. I also have any problems. I'm But it'll be a fun time. So we invite you to come on out. We also want to let you know about our summer sun groups. Our summer sun groups are a small group. They're small activity groups that run from July through August. They're not about studying the Bible or doing any of that stuff, but we just want to have an opportunity to be able to get together and know people and join people in fun activities. So whether you enjoy reading or reading at the beach or knitting or biking, walking your dog, or whatever it is, we want to invite you to either start or join a summer sun group. And so if you're interested in learning more about these groups or starting a summer sun group, please come talk to me after the service. And I want to leave you with this final benediction as you go your way. May the King who rules in love and mercy May the King who has only good things planned for your life. May the King who is willing to change and adapt to meet who you are and where you are. The King who loves you tremendously and won't ever stop loving you. May that King, may that God, may our Jesus guide you and bless you this Sabbath, the rest of this weekend. We want to thank you so much for choosing to worship with us here at Sun Valley. We hope to see you again next week. Amen.